Welcome to the CRADLE 10th anniversary event. Now, the 10th anniversary, you should regard this like the King's birthday. It's not really exactly 10 years since we started. We can't quite work out when the appropriate date is, but we decided that this will be the good time to celebrate. So it is roughly 10 years. It's probably a bit more, but we won't go into that. So I'd like to welcome you on behalf of my co-director, Phil Dawson, and myself to this event. A few apologies just before we start. We really wanted to have Beverly Oliver here, who was the originating DVC, whose conception CRADLE was. So all the things we did were stimulated by Beverly's crazy idea, and we kind of made it work. So you're going to hear about how we made it work. I'd also like to give apologies for our current Deputy Vice-Chancellor Academic, Jessica van der Leela, who's sick today, unfortunately. So that's good. But what we do have here is we have our previous Deputy Vice-Chancellor, Liz Johnson here, and we do have our absolutely brand new Senior PVC, Teaching and Learning, Shana Spittle here. And Shana will say a few words at the very end. So thank you for being here. What's the program today? Oh, first of all, we want to acknowledgement to country.
Thanks so much, Dave. I'm Phil Dawson. I'm other co-director of CRADLE, and thank you all so much for coming here to celebrate with us. We're celebrating today on the lands where CRADLE has done a lot of its work, which is the lands of the Wurundjeri people, and we pay our respects to elders past, present and becoming. We're currently in Porneet, which is tadpole season, which is true spring. So I don't know, people in the room, you've noticed sort of a change? We are there. One of the things I noticed coming to Melbourne was that we have this thing called deep winter, and we are now completely through it. So enjoy Porneet, enjoy this wonderful land that's unceded, where we've been able to do such amazing work. Thanks, Dave.
Thanks, Phil. So this is the program today. I've done some apologies. What I want to do is start off by talking about the CRADLE model. People ask, what is CRADLE? And I know it might be completely obvious to you, but in talking to people, I've discovered that different people have completely different ideas about who we are. So I want to say a bit about that and say some reflections on why I think it works. Of course, you may have completely different views about why it works, and you may have views on why it doesn't work, but we can pick that up later. So I'll be speaking for a little while about that. Then we have two panels. The first panel will be about, is higher education research in danger of being swamped by AI? Oh, could we ever imagine a question like that? And the second one is, what are the successes and challenges in translating educational research to practice? So my bit is to look a bit back about the way we do things, and the panels will look a bit forward. So the challenge faced by CRADLE. The title refers to the road behind and the journey ahead. So I don't want to focus on a litany of our achievements, but of course there'd be many and notable. I might sneak a few in just on the way through, but I'm not going to linger on those. What has made us do what we do? I think that's an interesting question. It's not as if we're the first higher education research centre to be established in Australia. There's been lots of others. Almost every single one has been disbanded and eliminated. Interesting question there. Well, how come we're still here yet? So what is CRADLE? Let's do that. So CRADLE is a centre that does research on assessment and digital learning. That's what the name says, in higher education. So far, so straightforward. However, like most university research centres, we have a dual remit, a dual focus. So we're contributing research which works in the wider higher education community, but we're also doing research that contributes to Deakin and its unique features and the way it positions itself. And these are kind of two balls which we continually juggle. Now, we could, like some other defunct higher education research centres, do research that gets very well regarded in the outside world, but internally people say, well, hang on, why are we paying for these people? They're doing things over there. So this is the challenge that we have throughout. So we must take cognizance of the fact that because we're funded by the university, we've got to do things that benefit the university and not just get scores in league tables. So it means not only do we do research, but we deliberately choose to focus on issues that are of concern to the university as an educational institution and our particular positioning within that. So where do we come from? CRADLE began with an idea. And the idea is that there should be a research centre in the heart of the university. And on the basis that Deakin has this view of being the top university for teaching and learning in Australia, for which there's good evidence, alongside that, we should also be the top university for doing research on teaching and learning in Australia. So that's how we want to position ourselves. And the invitation to start CRADLE was a really interesting challenge for me because I'd been in previous units in other universities in all sorts of different roles. So what could I learn from that we can take into this? So these are some of the themes. So what's our model of working? The first one is we must acknowledge that she, because it's always been she in the DVC's role, she who pays the piper calls the tune. And this might seem blindingly evident. It's not blindingly evident from the history of higher education research at all. So we're just a small core team. There's only 4.5 academics in CRADLE. That's our permanent group. We look a lot bigger because of the other things we do, but that core is small. And that means whatever else we do, we must actively support the mission of Deakin and help Deakin be good at what Deakin does. And to translate that into action, we must do applied research of various kinds. And it's not just applied research, which is short-term, quick and dirty. Lots of that goes on all over the place. What we want to do is we want to inform the directions that things are moving in. So while we might want to contribute to the strategic plan, we're more interested in the next one, the one after that, and how we might influence that and the directions things move in. So we need to not only keep people in the loop, we need to have this dialogue with senior management, not in order for us to do their, be their lackeys, because I don't think they think we're their lackeys, actually. No, this is very confirming that over there. But we're in that dialogue. Second issue is don't be aligned with just part of the university. One of the models of teaching and learning research centres is that they're located in a part of the university. And there happens to be a university not terribly far from here that has this model, right? And is fundamentally constrained by that model. So we're outside the faculty structure and let's see, here we have a little organisational chart. So we come under the DVC academic and the faculties are there. You can regard dotted lines with all the faculties, but that's our kind of line management. So we're side by side with Deakin Learning Futures, amongst other bits in that portfolio. And what that means is that we don't have to fight local battles. Having been in faculties myself in the past, the priority is always to do things that the faculty needs because they're local and immediate and they can lean on you more effectively than anyone else in the way that universities are structured. The other thing we have to do is to have this balance between internal and external visibility. And we need to show that what we do to the world in terms of things like publications. So we are committed to publications in high quality journals and things of that kind, seminars in important topics. But we also need to balance that with what is good internally for the Deakin community. So these are some of the external things which come out of our review that was conducted earlier in the year. So we're actually doing quite well. Since we used to have 410 journal articles, 82% in Q1 journals. And our impact is greater than other people in the field. And our seminar series is the most extraordinary success. Now, the fact that we did some of them in conjunction with TEXA just when Gen AI was coming kind of boosted our numbers a bit, right? But even if we kind of partition that off, we do get extraordinary numbers of seminars. We're also big on international collaborations. And of course, we've boosted this a bit by including our research students, our PhD students in this, but only a bunch of those are research students. So we have got and have had collaborations with all these countries. Not bad for 4.5 people. And of course, our review looked at things in terms of our internal impact on contributions to governance and policy, how we were referred to in policy documents, and so on and so forth. And I'll talk more about the latter list in a moment. The next one is probably, in my view, the biggest success factor. And this is where we are in direct contrast with most other higher education research groups. They take anything to do with teaching and learning in higher education, or indeed a university close to us, includes much more than teaching and learning in higher education in their remit. But we don't. The clue is in our name. It mentions assessment and digital learning. And when you look at our priority research areas, they're very focused. So we don't do anything. So if a PhD student wants to come along and do something, doing research on something about teaching and learning in higher education, we say, no, we don't want you, no matter how good you are. However, if you want to do something within these research priorities, and we spell this out in detail about what kind of things we do, then we have a whole bunch of PhD students who are sitting at the back there doing things which contribute to bulking up what we do and bulking up what Deakin does and having a big impact on a limited area rather than distributing ourselves across very wide areas. Fifth factor is we do go for external funding, but there's a terrible balance to be had. If we go for external research funding where the funding is to be had, this will direct us away from what's important here, because the money isn't in the areas that were previously supported by the Office of Learning and Teaching. The Office of Learning and Teaching was abolished the year after we started. So we started with this wonderful idea that we've had to get lots of money from this source. And we would have done, because all of us, or most of us in the early days, had a very, very good track record in getting money from these people. But the plug was pulled. We still need something like that, but the plug was pulled then, so we have to look around. And the challenge is we need to say, no, we're not going to do that. That takes us in some other direction. So there's all sorts of ed techie things. There's all sorts of things in the professions where we could be funded, but we're very, very careful about that. So we've got some of the usual suspects there and some non-usual suspects. Sixth one is, and this is something which wasn't apparent at first, but it's a function of the inclination of the people that became part of CRADLE. And that is, we want to produce outputs and papers that people can read, right? Not papers that people say, oh gosh, I need so much prior knowledge of these strategies or techniques or this theory that I can't possibly get anywhere with these papers. So we have a very, very clear commitment that our ideas should be accessible. Now, sometimes it's not always possible to do that. When you're doing empirical research, it is often wrapped up with theory and, even statistical methods and all kinds of things like that some people won't be able to grasp. But we do have a commitment to producing accessible outputs as well. CRADLE suggests there's a whole series about that. We've got all sorts of other resources on our website about, how you design assessment for will and any number of other things as well. Seventh thing that we do is that we have the role of developing the capacity of Deakin staff to research in higher education, in particular to research on assessment and digital learning. So we have two schemes for that. The CRADLE Fellowship Scheme, which is initiated by an individual staff member, academic in either the faculties or one of the divisions, and they come along with something. And if it fits within the profile, then we support them with a tiny amount of money, but a lot of support. So that's this on the left. There's the researcher-initiated things. And on the right, we have development partners in which we take some of the ideas we've been working on and developed over the years, and we try to get somebody from each faculty to implement that within their own programs. And these are the names of our fellows to date. And these are our successful PhD students. And we're anticipating a lot more, particularly people in the room here. And you'll see from the list here, some of these are external people, and some of the people here are names that you'll recognise. I mean, there's Jacqueline Broadbent is sitting up in the corner there, for example. Darcy Taylor is over here on the table. And many of these others are, most of those are external and now have since graduated. So, 8th point is selecting core colleagues judiciously. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, we don't just appoint people that are good at research. Obviously, in a research centre, you've got to appoint people that are good at research, got to have a track record. But on the other hand, research itself isn't enough. What we want is people that can collaborate, people that can actually speak meaningfully to academics. We also want people that have got organisational savvy, right? They don't go around doing stupid things. Well, if they do, we cover it up. We cover it up. Don't quote me on this, of course.
I know.
Yeah. So collaboration is a key part of what we do. Oh, that's our core staff. We've only lost one person so far of our core staff, and I mean, no, she went to some, professorial position at the University of British Columbia. And I thought, well, I suppose that's a reasonable place to kind of end up if you, fed up with CRADLE. Develop a productive culture within the centre. And this is twofold thing. Everyone in the centre, all that core team and other people we bring in, all committed to collaboration. Collaboration with each other, collaboration with staff at Deakin, collaboration with partners, both in Australian universities and internationally. We like collaboration. We don't like to appoint prima donnas. Now, luckily, there's a shortage of prima donnas in the kind of the space out there, so it hasn't been too hard. But we have been quite deliberate in choosing people that can operate in this kind of environment, not just good at research. Good at research is not good enough. We want a bit more. And finally, we want to be self-critical and open to external scrutiny. So we initiated at the end of last year a big self-review of what we've done over those 10 years, which produced an extensive document with some data in it. And I've pulled out a little bit of the data on some of these slides here. But then that went to the hands of an external evaluator, which Liz appointed over there, highly esteemed person from the outside world. And they came in and interviewed people internally and externally, took a good hard look at what we were doing, and then came to their own conclusions. And these are some of the conclusions that they came up with. But the other thing is CRADLE is a moving feast. So we're responsive to what goes on. We're responsive to issues of the day. In the past, we've been responsive to issues of feedback, and right now, we're responsive to issues about assessment and AI. And that's hot, very hot at the moment, and we might hear a little bit of it later on the panel here. So what I want to do now is to thank you for that bit and introduce the panel. There'll be opportunity for questions later, and those of you online, please put in your questions into the Q&A section so you can actually vote and uptick the questions you really want put later. So the first panel, and I'd like my colleagues to come forward. I sit in these three chairs here. There's Jusso Nijmenen, who's our newest this year, part of the core team. Thomas Corbin, who is here in Cradle with a very, very special focus as a research, no, it's not a research for anyone, a lecturer looking at assessment AI, and Margaret Bierman, who's been here for some time, and everyone knows her. So I pass over to you.
Is there a,
Thomas.
I don't know if I'm stupid. There's no slides that say not core member over pointing this way. Is there nothing like that? No. So I'm going to start off the panel and then we're going to open up for a few minutes of question time. We're going to talk for about 20 minutes total. So 10 minutes us chatting, 10 minutes you chatting with us in between. Talking a little bit about has AI taken over everything? And my perspective is kind of, but not really, but maybe. That's why I'm not a core member, actually. I can't sit on these things. So my perspective on AI and the current debates, the literature on all things assessment, all things higher education, is that it is everywhere, but it's everywhere in a sense that maybe isn't a problem. So I think a lot about goldfish because I'm that kind of person. Again, that's why they didn't want me a core member, goldfish person. They're like, why does a goldfish care about water? A goldfish cares about water when it's not in the water anymore. And that's why I think about AI in a lot of these kind of research spaces. So Joe Ty and I published a paper earlier in the year with Jean Flannery on AI feedback. And most of the good stuff in that paper isn't on AI at all. It's about what does focusing on AI feedback show us about feedback generally? What does it tell us? Well, what doesn't AI have in that feedback space? Well, it doesn't have relationships with students in the way that humans have. It doesn't have responsibilities to each other. It doesn't recognize people in a way that matters. If I'm talking to you, I can see Phil nodding at me. I know I'm reassured by this. I might know what I'm talking about. People are looking at me like I might actually know something about this area, which helps my identity as an expert or a researcher or whatever. Dave doesn't even know what my role is, but whatever that role is, that helps me understand that. Whereas if AI gives me that, I don't really care. It doesn't do the same thing. So although Joe and I were focused on AI, in a sense, we kind of weren't. We were trying to see what we could learn about feedback and go back into this feedback literature and help it expand. And that really shows that next step. So feedback literature for the last, 20 years has gone from thinking about it as a message to thinking about a process, thinking more about students as engaged in it. And now we're thinking more and more about relationships. And I think AI, even if we're not really that interested in AI, might help us in that. So in that sense, I do think it's taking over everything, but maybe it's helpful.
Thank you, Thomas. I'm going to continue from there by taking quite a clear stance. I do think that we are in quite a high risk of being swamped by AI research. That is my personal stance. I'm going to be a bit critical here. Luckily, we do have these wonderful, wise colleagues, such as Thomas, who do work that quite reflexively contribute to higher education research by considering what is actually important here. But there are other people who go around doing stupid things out there, unfortunately. I do think that this is a time for us to think very carefully about what bodies of knowledge we want to connect with as we do research on AI, which is obviously very important. Hard to disagree here. And I'm just going to very briefly provide one example from the earlier CRADLE work that I think might be a good, a body of knowledge to connect with. The work on the digital world that CRADLE has been quite prominent in working on. I'm a bit worried about the surge of AI stuff that has references in a way that the oldest reference is from 2024, when there is already quite a bit of work on how our students and our teachers operate in a digital world where AI plays, yes, a big, perhaps even a massive role, but only one specific kind of a role. So what is the role exactly? And how does that connect with other things in the digital world? And I think earlier work on how assessment, digital assessment, the digital assessment, call it how you will, how these ideas connect, I think is something quite important for us. But yeah, there is a real risk. Wouldn't you agree?
I completely agree. I think there is a real risk. And I think that what is interesting to me, though, is I don't think it's a risk to which we being CRADLE and colleagues, friends, are likely to succumb. And I've been thinking about this a little bit. We had some kind of a planning meeting yesterday, and we're talking about issues of CRADLE. And we're talking about how in the past, we've really been driven by sort of curiosity, for to use Dave, to quote Dave, the problem in the world, the thing that's causing challenge. And so some time ago, well before large language models were a thing, Phil and I particularly were really concerned about this sort of AI business. It was looming there on the horizon, and we could see it coming. So we started to be curious about it. And it needed curiosity because no one else was being curious about it. I had a lot of trouble getting traction and work on AI, even 4 years ago, 3 years ago even. So I think that one of the things to remember from a CRADLE perspective is that combination of genuine tension, challenge in the world, and I'm going to say individual, because that's we are researchers, individual and collective curiosity. As long as we hold that as kind of the thing to drive us forward, I think we'll be okay. And I think that, AI is in most things now. Most things are digitally mediated, but that doesn't mean the research needs to be about them. We have long-standing teaching and learning issues that have nothing to do with technology. Technology, as everyone else has pointed out, complicates, adds, sometimes permits us to reflect back on, but they still exist in the space between, people working with other people to develop who they are, what they can do, and how they might want to be in the world. And I think for me, that's what it's about. And I believe the field will, as it has many times before, and Dave, you would have seen this more than most, I think, surf through the wave of the overexcitement and land safely on the other side. So I think we're going to have questions now. Anyone want to talk about this issue of AI and AI use? I think I said to TC you were running the questions. But I have the microphone.
Liz, start things off.
You've got my brain cells working. The beauty of retirement is, Tom, that's gorgeous. And it is really lovely to be here. The hype around AI, and I will say hype, reminds me of the idea of a liminal space, which for me came through threshold concepts. Is it just noisy because we don't know where we're going?
Do we want to?
I'm happy to get down on that. I think the interesting thing about AI, as with other big changes, who here remembers when the web arrived and the deep hysteria? And you know what the hysteria was? You had lots of hands. The hysteria was deserved. It's completely upended our world. I think it comes with things that are both social changes and and higher ed changes. And the problem is that I think it takes a while for society to work out how it's going to arrange itself around. So a bit of both. I think a bit of noise and a bit of genuine, we don't know what this means for us. Anyone else?
I might just add that I do think that we need to be reflexive about how we also feed into the hype and how we are part of it. We are not just moving towards an unknown future. We are shaping the future as we are engaging with research on AI. And we are very, very much a part of that discourse happening around us.
Yeah, I agree. There's just one other thing, though. In as much as we're adding to the discourse and predicting where it's going to go, AI will no longer be a major keyword. All things crash and build up. But it's not like we go back to what happened before. It's not like once we stop talking about AI as much, it just won't exist. It's like one of our fabulous PhD students, Sky, is working on AI and assessment. And we're talking about ways to kind of future-proof a PhD in this space. And one of the examples was, well, it's not like Excel, it's built into everything. Like having specific skills in technology or having specific awarenesses of particular types of technology, it's just there. We won't talk about AI maybe, but maybe that's just because everything will have AI in it. That will be escaping it. Jill. Jack and Jill.
Thank you. Yeah, right.
I've just come off the back of marking some assignments, right? I do work in higher ed, by the way, and research on that, just a little, and governance issues. My question is, what does AI mean in terms of understanding about knowledge production, knowledge legitimation, and the role of the university?
We all have so much to say. Oh my goodness. I'll start and then everyone else can sort of build. Well, I mean, I think of AI in all its forms, in social media forms, or in the algorithmic mediation of knowledge. It's having a huge impact on what we think knowledge is, not just in the university, but socially. And I think that will remain an ongoing challenge for us. And I think that this sort of idea of what legitimates knowledge, the role of the university in a time of digitally mediated everything, is a pressing and urgent problem in the world for us to look at, Jill. And yes, we have.
My 2 cents. I have a lot of hope for assessment at the moment of providing the sort of a space that where our students could have part of these conversations. I think this is the question that we do need to pose for our students. And I do think assessment is the space for doing that. And showing students through assessment how knowledge gets legitimated in a particular field of knowledge. What counts as knowledge, what counts as knowing, who counts as a legitimate knower, all these sorts of big ideas, how those could be broken down into this practical day-to-day moments through assessment and feedback. I think that's where innovation happens.
I'm just thinking about more specific kind of cases. One of the things I research at CRADLE is reading, the way students use AI to read, Deakin and other universities. And I've talked to librarians and I've talked to some of the journal companies as well about the way they are seeing the future of academic texts. And one of the interesting things that I see come up occasionally is a reimagining of access, reimagining of proximity, I suppose. So normally, you take a book, you take a journal article, you sit in front of it, you read it, you might read some of it, you might skim it, but whatever you're doing with it, it's a one-to-one thing. You're directly with that text normally. Sometimes you're not, sometimes you read an edited volume, whatever, but it's still there. It's nothing in between you. But AI increasingly is being inserted or being used as a mediator in ways that can be extremely valuable, but can also be problematic. So we see a lot of students using AI to mediate their readings in ways that allow them access to knowledge, open up epistemic or overcome epistemic barriers, whether that's linguistic barriers or disciplinary linguistic barriers, allowing students from one discipline to go into another and engage. But there's also that downside, and that any conversation about AI, I mean, what have we got, 7 minutes? And someone's going to start talking about double-edged swords. And although it is a bit expected, it's expected for a reason, I suppose.
And as a feminist,
absolutely, yeah.
I've got some beautiful questions from online and the perfect panel to answer this first one from Juliet. Is it a problem that assessment in higher education isn't strongly aligned with a theoretical or philosophical tradition?
You're holding the microphone.
Yeah, I know. It's a, I don't know. It might be. Jill wants to answer.
I can answer it.
You go on.
There's a long theoretical tradition.
You just read it out loud without the microphone. I'll repeat it and I'll pretend it's my answer.
In education, there's a long tradition of theorising about assessment and pedagogy. But I think when higher education suddenly became extremely nervous about teaching and learning and suddenly went down that track, as Liz would know all about this, because of student outcomes and all those types of evaluations on how universities were being judged. Unfortunately, that wasn't pulled in as much as it should have been. And in fact, no one came to us in education to ask about that tradition.
I'm going to provide a a contradictory kind of answer across all of this. Yes and no. So I think in some domains, assessment is very heavily theorised and there's a very strong philosophy of it. Anyone here from healthcare? Anyone here from medicine, for example? I mean, you know, there's a lot of theory and a lot of thought behind assessment in medical education. I spend a lot of time there. But that means that there are theories. There's not a single mode of thinking or doing or being about assessment. I actually think that's quite important to remember. I think the biggest problem, which perhaps the person is alluding to, is the theory of no theory. You know, we don't need one, we don't have one. It's not a theoretical frame. It's just a practice. And I think however you think about it, conceptualizing or theorizing the reasons why and how you are assessing is really important.
I think that's especially important at the moment because, especially like going back to the AI moment, whatever that means, we need to do stuff. Teachers need to make assessments. Universities need policies. We need to think about what ways we want to use AI or ways we don't. I'm thinking about Danny's two-lane, for example. It's something people can use immediately. And once you start using it, it's going to be hard to undo. A lot of these things are going to be hard to undo if we start using them. AI feedback, whatever the case may be. So we want to make sure that the concepts underneath it are pretty rock solid. And it's very easy at the moment for some ideas, not Danny's two-lane system, but some ideas that might gain traction, which don't have enough substance to really uphold themselves, to really support the kind of work we want to put them to work with within the university. If we are relying on those, then we're going to be in trouble. So I think at the moment especially, we do need good empirical work. We do need to talk to students about the way they're using it. We wanted them to have their insights into the kind of decisions we're making. But at the same time, we really need good concepts. We really need to be thinking hard about conceptual analysis and making sure that we're getting the most out of these tools.
I'm getting we've spent enough time
We've
on
spent
this.
enough time.
Nod. Okay, so I'm here with the mic. Oh, no, you've got a microphone too. Oh, well, I'm going to do it because I'm here. So I'm going to hand over to the next panel.
You can introduce the next panel.
I will do. The next panel is Bill Dawson, co-director CRADLE, Jack Walton, lecturer CRADLE, and Joe Tai, who is associate professor CRADLE.
Thank you very much. And a big round of applause for the previous panel. So we are here to talk about the challenge of translation into practice. You might have seen a thing on the slide. It was about challenges of translation into practice. Dave said that we don't do stupid things. And I want to admit to a stupid opinion that I have held. It's a thinking, not a doing. So it's okay. So I first met Margaret when we were both working at Monash, and we were going to apply for a grant from the Office for Learning and Teaching. Fantastic. We co-led this grant. It was a wonderful thing. I know that I came to you with the very naive view of the research literature says people should do X, but people aren't doing X. They should do X. And that is the problem. That's probably the worst conceptualization of research translation possible. I have, over time, become less stupid. And I'll tell you some of the things that I've come to understand as I have let go of that stupidity. Firstly, obviously, a unidirectional view of research translation is a terrible thing. I really like the work that the Office for Learning and Teaching did over the years, and Siobhan Lenihan is up the back, who was one of my initial contacts at the OLT back in the day. You did all the work. No. But one of the things that the Office for Learning and Teaching would grill you on was you can't just come up with these ideas and go out into the world and tell them to people and make them do the thing. That's not how it works at all. There was this concept of engaged dissemination that was very core to what they did. Was it Tilly Hinton's Impel ladder? There was a whole ladder. There were models, there were frameworks, there were structures for doing this. And they were quite influential on me and on the work that Margaret and I and many others who've become associated with CRADLE, including Dave, did in that project. So it's not just a one-way thing. Secondly, it's a wicked problem. And I'll point to a paper led by Thomas Corbin recently of AI and assessment as a wicked problem. The way you conceptualize of the problem changes how translation might work. But even the best solution can't just be kind of picked up and planted and delivered somewhere. And that was a piece of stupidity I had to let go to be able to operate in this cradle way that we do it. I think one of our successes has been to do projects that deeply understand the nature of practice, the nature of the work, the nature of what teachers actually do, and to be with and alongside teachers. And I'd point to some of the autoethnographic work, collaborative autoethnographic work that Margaret has led for us. And then finally, some of you might have seen this sort of meme of draw the rest of the owl. So picture this. It's an art book. It's a how to draw book. And it's got 2 circles. And it says, draw 2 circles. And then it's got a beautiful picture of an owl. And it says, then draw the rest of the owl. And that's obviously ludicrous. It's craziness to say someone could go straight from the circles to the owl. And there's swearing involved in the meme. You can look it up. I think sometimes we in higher ed research can provide guidance to just draw the rest of the owl when what's needed are the circles and the intermediary bits in between. And we can only understand that through walking alongside higher education teachers, higher education students. So that's my view on the challenges and how I've shared some of the stupidity.
To me, it is interesting listening to you talk, Phil, because I think we might have had like the same entry point way of thinking into assessment in higher education, that concept X, we should do concept X. And maybe we both had a conversation with Margaret at some point about it. So the takeaway is, if you haven't had a conversation with Margaret yet, you should have a conversation with Margaret. No, it's interesting to me thinking also about the questions that have come before, particularly that question online. We've talked about concepts, ideas quite a bit. And, you know, when I think back to that meeting that Margaret mentioned that we had yesterday, we were having a kind of strategic meeting and talking about the role of conceptualization. And for me, one of the coolest things about certainly being in assessment and digital learning, but education generally, is that we get to work with concepts. That's a really cool thing that we get to do. Concepts are so portable. They're things that we can share. They're things that we can do something with. They're intangible, but they have effects. And I think, you know, part of our job on this panel just now is to talk about successes and challenges. And I think when I think about certainly looking in at CRADLE as an outsider, I've been with CRADLE since 2024, so I've known you a lot longer than that, but I've also been on that other side. One of the coolest things that I think CRADLE has done, and that is a joy for me to be a part of right now, is the conceptualization. And if I think about, I think evaluative judgment is coming up on 10 years since the original paper, or since the paper that you led, Joe, came out. There's been so many cool concepts coming out, and evaluative judgment is one. Feedback literacy, I remember, Phil, when we first met, you were saying, oh, there's this thing, feedback literacy might be a thing we get into, maybe, you know, I'll let you talk more about that. But that's one of the most, I think, really interesting successes of CRADLE, also of the field in general. I think the conversation that happens now at a conceptual level has just advanced so far over the last couple of decades, beyond the time that CRADLE has existed. With that comes a really, really interesting challenge, which is, how do we put these beautiful concepts to work? And it is, I think, the challenge that we have, that I know we do deal with, but that we also, I think, try to remember to deal with, is that those concepts that we come up with, our evaluative judgment, our feedback literacy, don't do anything by themselves. They require engagement with others. They require participation, opportunities to put these things out into the world and to see what happens. And so I think in that respect, I want to also say, maybe there's a good time to say thank you to everyone who has participated in that journey. Maybe Joe's going to speak about this a little more. But yeah, I think that is the interesting flip side to what you were saying there. When it comes to doing the work that we do, within the boundaries that we do it, again, CRADLE has quite a tight remit. It's only possible through engagement, I think. And that is a good segue for you.
Very good segue. And I'm also going to reference a conversation with Margaret. And as Jack was mentioning, one of the tricky things is coming up with good ideas and then, well, what are we going to do next with them? And this was a specific conversation, I think was in Florence. And we were going, well, we've got these great ideas. Gee, wouldn't it be wonderful we had more people to work with to actually test them out a little bit more? We've kicked them around as a group. We've made some inroads. We've found some great people who are willing to sort of take on some of those ideas. But gee, couldn't we do something a little bit more formal? And thus, the development partners scheme came about. Margaret remembers this conversation. There was good mozzarella as well. But yeah, I think one of the great successes, I would say, personally, for me at least, in doing some of that translation work is actually getting to work with other people at Deakin University, going with them on the journey of figuring out together, how are we going to implement this thing? And Phil and Margaret have been part of that process as well. And some of the people in the room and maybe online, I think, have been part of that. And it's really about sort of doing it together. So I think while Dave highlighted that the core CRADLE team is quite small, a lot of what we have managed to work out, to figure out, the insights that we've generated have not been just us alone. There's actually been a whole bunch of people, and even with our PhD students and everyone else. This is how things change from just some cool ideas to something that we can see working, sometimes not as good as others. And that is part of the challenge, the iteration that is needed to actually figure out what works in practice. So I think working together, figuring out the problems together, not just trying to parachute in a solution, but actually looking at what the problem is in context has been one of the things that I think we've gradually come to realise has been very useful and quite exciting and motivating. And yeah, I mean, and so here's the plug for Margaret's seminar next month, which is again another project where she worked with people on something to come to a deeper insights and better understandings about what's going on. So I think it's probably time to shift back to questions online or in the room. So we'll swap mics. What are we doing?
I've got the online questions for this one, so I thought I'd go online first. And this is actually a leftover from our talk, but it's had 4 upvotes, which makes it very upvoted by what's on at the moment. And so I thought I'd ask it. And you can handle all things. If assessment and feedback are at their core moral practices that shape who we become as learners and professionals, this is Michelle Pedlow, by the way, what are the implications when part of that moral agency is delegated to artificial intelligence? How do we find a balance?
Great question that I feel ill-equipped to handle. Jill, I'm almost wanting, you sure? All right, I was going to give this one to Jill. Look, I think it is something that we actually can't offload to AI. I think that if I project forward 50 years or something to some techno-utopia or dystopia, the one thing that I hope people hold on to is that kind of moral agency. Margaret's been talking a bit, you keep getting shout outs, Margaret. Margaret's been talking a bit lately about sort of what's left for people, and responsibility is one of the things that was on your whiteboard as something that stays uniquely human. And I think those ideas, you also had judgment about what's okay, what's good enough, what's moral, what's acceptable, and responsibility for decisions made. And if we look at the Deloitte report where they had to refund the government, that's a case, in my view, as someone who's not in that space at all, but an AI sort of person, of really someone needed to take responsibility and exercise their judgment. I'd personally be quite okay about Deloitte using AI in making the report, but the mistake and the lack of ownership over it, lack of responsibility, that's the problem. So I say hand over 0 in terms of responsibility and judgment and morality.
I guess the other thing to think about is that AI has ultimately been trained and programmed and shaped by humans. So I'm not saying that, oh, we can devolve responsibility for decisions to AI because a human was behind it. But the question exists, would you trust somebody else to make that decision for you and have that processed by technology and then come out the other end? So maybe there are some decisions, very small ones perhaps, that we could sort of say, well, an AI can make the initial round of decision and then a human can review lots of things. But I'd suggest in the world, and I know Michelle comes from a health background, that there are many things that we really wouldn't want to cede our responsibility over.
I'm wondering, just in keeping with the concept of the theme not being overtaken by AI, if someone from the room has a question that isn't about AI, before I move to you, Jack, about translation to practice that isn't about AI. Come on.
AI has taken.
The problems are only worse with AI, right?
So dependent then.
You can't even ask a question.
This is an interesting test of the thesis of the previous panel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have another question?
Somewhat contextual. Can we design digital solutions where there's moral bankruptcy?
Can you say a bit more?
It's easy to assume that perhaps morally there's a high ground that we all occupy, but in actual fact we as humans grossly overestimate our moral and morality and ethics. So from the perspective that we assume we're morally bankrupt, evidenced by the atrocious things we do to each other, can we create solutions, digital solutions, that are actually worthwhile and meaningful to neutralizing that morality void?
I'm going to give a really inconvenient answer, which is it depends. But I mean, I don't say that to be trite. Again, it's to my point earlier about working with concepts. One of the things that I think, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about our AI work, knowing that the idea here is not to be taken over by AI, is that I think if I were to summarize one of the big picture learnings coming out of that for us, it is that operating at the generic when we try to make decisions about these, particularly design-related decisions, is a very, very difficult position from which to do design work that meaningfully addresses problems in context. Yeah.
So I think to bring this back to like an assessment sort of space, I think the place this plays out in a really live way is the AI detectors debate. And, there are people, and I'm not one of them, but I want to represent a view, that think that AI detectors are actually a moral force for good, and they are addressing a real challenge that we have whereby some academics either don't care about student use of AI in ways that compromise validity or would be tantamount to cheating or whatever. And these systems are a thing that will be a moral good. And I'm having trouble representing that view faithfully because I don't agree with it. But I think this gets to sort of whose morality there's not a shared sort of view. I think the AI tech bro thing of we will synthesize all of human knowledge probably includes we'll synthesize all of human morality into the one system that will hold the average of that. I think it's really problematic.
Great. So 3 more questions in the room so far. Mina's first up.
My question is about research into practice, and I would love to, I guess it's maybe a request, I would love to hear more from each of you, perhaps about a time or a way in which the research that you've done has changed your own practice, or even maybe the way that you kind of move through the world.
I guess one of the big things for me has been the work I've been doing. And it started with a conversation with the Disability Resource Centre about, I was like, what, surely there couldn't be anything to do with assessment because we were very, sticking to our focus. Surely there's nothing that they have to do with assessment. But of course, I was wrong. And they were talking about how big adjustments were becoming. And this was like 2018, 2019. And I guess that really sparked an interest for me. I was like, well, what's wrong with assessment then? And this spurred me to, apply for grants, get more money, do research projects, seeking to privilege students' voices, particularly students with disability, and really get into the idea that, assessment isn't inclusive and that we need to be thinking about it from that perspective. And what can we do as assessment researchers that could sort of promote the conversation and change what happens in practice? So that for me was a really big thing and has, really changed my perspective on, what's important and what the goals are when we're talking about assessment design and researching assessment.
Yeah, I think this is such a fun question to answer because it's immediately reflective, and there are a bunch of different things that come to mind. I think the way that I want to answer it is I want to tell you my favorite interview question that I've asked in the time that I have, I think in all the time I've worked at CRADLE, which is not an interview question I think I had ever been trained to ask or been included in my research on assessment before that. And that was the question, how do you feel? Probably most of my work before that had been to do with design, with the technical specifics, with the concept, Phil, to your point. When you ask people how they feel, you immediately encounter the limits of your concepts. It is wonderful to come up with new fandangled ways of doing things, of things that are important to do in assessment, how it should work, what the purpose should be, how the things are aligned, how the cogs all fit together. And that falls apart so quickly if it does not match the story or if it's not sympathetic to the story that is being told in practice. Yeah.
And then I'll take the you had in there the change the way you move through the world and all that. So last night I'm at Taekwondo training. It's great fun, and I'm getting noted on some particular things. I tend to be really I put too much emphasis into things. I put my whole body into everything. I should be smoother and whatever. And I'm there and I'm asking all these questions and I'm trying to actually create that feedback loop myself. I'm trying to have that conversation and everything. And it reminds me of the different ways that I used to train when I used to do it like 15 years ago, when I'd get a note and it would be almost a personal attack or something. It would feel different. And I think the study of feedback and feedback literacy, but even more importantly, just talking to a lot of research participants, largely students, who did it a whole lot better than me. I've just learned, I've been able to sit with people who do the thing better than me and learn how to do it. Still make mistakes, still do stupid things, but yeah, try to do it better.
Over here, thank you. And I just wanted to say, I suppose it's a question with a comment, as you can do. I read a lot about what people write about their teaching, and the concepts that you're talking about from CRADLE are always there when people are talking about assessment. So well done, And so my question is, when you look around the sector and what people are doing in assessment and feedback now compared to 10 years ago, what are the things that you're most proud of that you think have changed in the way we're doing assessment and feedback?
Wow, thank you so much. This is almost the Dorothy Dixer question. So checks in the mail. Look, I think for me personally, it's some of the stuff around the conversation around cheating, AI, validity, and a shift towards a more positive conversation and one that really gets to the heart of the matter of, can we tell what people are capable of in situations where that matters? How can we certify, credential, or celebrate that? I think we've helped move the needle a little bit. We avoided a stupid law that would have punished parents if they offered to do their child's reference list for them, the same as if you kicked someone in the head. Like, seriously, we're going to have that as a criminal law. A whole bunch of stuff like that. I think we've changed the nature of the conversation to a more positive one that's focused on the things that really matter.
I'm going to pause and I'm going to say the program indicated on our run sheet that the rest of the panel would come back up. So questions can be aimed at them too. And maybe this is one question that they'd like to respond to if you want to shuffle up slowly. Well, I mean, you so and Thomas, you can also. Yeah. Okay. All right. Thomas, do you want to go? Or there you go. Okay. I guess one really cool thing for me was when I arrived at CRADLE, I literally just finished my PhD. And Dave and Phil and everyone was like, well, this evaluative judgment thing, Joe, you know, it's not a terrible idea. Would you like to, you know, maybe we should work on it a little bit more. And I think thanks to the support of the team, and I also remember Liz Johnson at the Teaching and Learning Conference a couple of years later promoting the book. It's been really impressive to see people get on board with the idea, which is really, you know, a pedagogical reframing of ideas that had already existed. But it's been gobsmacking to me to see how big that has grown while the research is still sort of on the way. And thanks to PhD students who've got on that wagon, I think it's been really cool to see that grow as an idea that has helped other people see things differently. And I still get people going, oh, I read that paper and it really made a difference to how I think about things. So that's been cool. Who's next?
I mean, I've got the microphone. He's got a microphone. It's me. I think I want to refer back, I think, to what you were talking about, Phil, which is the changes in the terms of the conversation for me is one of the coolest things to see and also to contextualize against, I think, my vision of a time when I was not active in this field. So I got into the assessment game in 2016. And when you do a PhD and all that jazz, and you read what people wrote about in the 80s, the 90s, and later on, and you read about things like authentic assessment, and then you read a little later about authenticity in assessment, and you see how these things change over time, and they don't happen instantly. That is a really easy thing to lose sight of when you're actually working on this stuff. You know, evaluative judgment, you were saying the research is still coming along. I think the game that we're playing has been going on long enough now that we can see how things have changed. I think that also behooves us to look very carefully at what underpinned some of those bigger changes that came along. When norm referencing gave way to criterion referencing, it's not something you hear much chatter about these days. The thinking that underpinned that shift is still very influential in the way that we do assessment now, and not always in a positive way. So I think the coolest thing is to see what has changed, and at the same time to appreciate that I think brings with us sometimes some subtle baggage that still needs very, very careful examination.
I was going to suggest, you might want to go next, Thomas, but I was thinking that Dave might want to reflect on this question. He's going to pass. Okay.
You can have the final say if you want.
Yeah. All right. We can. I maybe move, Barbie. Maybe we'll move on to the next question. Do you think, or should we keep going? What do you reckon? You're in charge of them.
Not my choice.
Sorry, I'm looking at Thomas. Oh yeah, you can take the choice, Barbie. Go for it. Do you want us to keep on going?
Well, the only thing I was going to add is just on the concept thing. I mean, we've talked a lot about how cool it is to work with concepts and stuff, but perhaps not why. I mean, the one thing that I've seen this year particularly is when you give someone, I mean, what concepts are tools that we use to understand the world. And when you land on something good, when you do good work developing these concepts and people go, oh shit, yeah. And they're really natural to apply. So, I mean, the Talk is Cheap paper that we wrote earlier in the year, I don't know what it's up to now, but it's something like 40,000 people have read that in the last few months. And we get emails all the time that say, oh, it just makes so much sense now. Wicked problems, paper came out a couple of months ago. I'm constantly hearing the expression wicked problems in people's talks and just popping up all over the place now. And that emerged because I was talking to people in faculty, friends of mine who I used to lecture with, and they'd say, oh, I've got this problem with AI. I'm going to do X. And then I'd just shoot it down. I'd say, they'd say, I'm going to do exams. And I'd say, oh, exams are crap, don't do that. And then they'd say, oh, I'm going to do X. And I'd say, oh, X is crap, don't do that. And they'd say, well, what the fuck do you want me to do? And I'm like, yeah, good point. I don't know what I want you to do. Because everything I suggested had a loss. Someone was disadvantaged by it. There was nothing perfect. And they just got so frustrated and they just felt like, oh, I need something to do. What am I supposed to do in this position? Students are looking to me. I'm like, yeah, okay. How do I help with that? So I was in a position, and CRADLE's in a position where we can think about that and develop concepts that allow us to make sense of that moment and give us a way to make progress and forward movement out of it. And that has been really amazing. So that'd be mine. And now you have to say one, Margaret, otherwise you're by yourself. Although this is a very how great is Margaret panel. So
there's you so. I mean, I think there's something about looking back over time and seeing what is taken and what hasn't taken and what persists. And I think one of the really heartening things is that over time, over the last 20 years, if I can go back, or maybe let's go sort of a little bit closer, when Phil and I had that conversation in that office in Caulfield, going, oh, we're going to tell people what to do, and then they're going to go and do it. And to see from that time then to where we are now, how much practice has changed. It really has. I think assessment practices across the sector have changed. The pandemic put paid to a lot of exams. We're now having external things that may shift that again, but we'll never go back to the unquestioning acceptance of shoving people into a large hall and giving them a bunch of multi-guess questions. We know that is not, that is something, it is well understood that is not optimal. So even if we resort to it at times, we understand the drawbacks with it. And when you look across that shift in time, I think to be a bit humble about it, you see yourself as part of the fabric of the shift of higher education. You know, Dave made some discussion about this as a collaborative game. It's a team sport. Education is, as researchers, and also, you know, as this last panel observed, with practitioners, with our colleagues, some of whom are here in the room, who are teaching right now to people, making choices, and they're drawing from all that change in the world of which we've been a part. And I think it's really, really nice to reflect on. And I also think it's important to reflect on that we've done it together. Because my favourite thing about being in this space, it is a collaborative, collective space. There you go. Musa, do you have anything you want to add, having ended on that very sort of touchy-feely moment?
So many excellent things have already been said. Maybe one thing that I could add, which is a bit of a different perspective. Yes, the work that CRADLE does is quite focused. We have assessment, digital learning. These are the ideas and concepts that we put out there in the world, and then they float and they emerge in places that might not, that might be a bit surprising. And the one example that I have in mind is that some of these ideas that CRADLE have developed are quite influential in, say, school education across the world. Coming from Finland myself, it's quite incredible to see how ideas such as feedback literacy are now taken up at the school sector, which is just one example of how these concepts, they travel and they do things beyond our control and beyond our initial scope. And that's something that really fills me with pride.
Dave, did you decide you wanted to add something, or are you still going to pass?
Yeah, I have something, and then I'll move on. You finished the... Yeah. Well, thanks for the panels. Really raised all sorts of really interesting and exciting questions. I suppose of many of all the people here, I probably got the longest memory of assessment in higher education. And the thing that strikes me looking back over a much longer period of time than we've just referred to is that there were always people in universities doing interesting and exciting things. about assessment and later digital learning. There was always, right from when I was a PhD student, someone at the end of the corridor playing with computers. For many decades, this didn't lead to anything whatsoever. But suddenly we find ourselves in this kind of quite transformed space. On the assessment front, the thing that I've noticed is that individuals were doing things in their own teaching, some of which were wonderful. And I learned this, and I did some extraordinary things in my own teaching. And one of the things that you had to be careful of back then is not telling your colleagues what you were doing, right? Persuading the students that this was a fantastically good thing to do, and only once it worked, revealing what one does to one's colleagues. Now, we don't do that anymore. And there's a positive and a negative. It means some of the extreme things we could get away with back then, which I did get away with back then, can't be done. But on the other hand, we're moving from this individualistic, highly partitioned kind of view of assessment in particular, and all sorts of other things to do with teaching and learning, to ones where we're sharing ideas. So now we're in a position where when somebody has a good idea, it gets taken up. Now, of course, it never gets taken up as widely as we would desire. There's always going to be these kind of little dinosaurs hanging around in just about every school, in every university, doing things which are kind of pulling us back into something which can't be defended on really any grounds whatsoever. When people used to challenge what I was doing at UTS, because I was the head of school that, for example, had no grading of any kind in any course in the whole school, right? And I used to kind of defend that. And I used to defend it at academic board. And one of the ways I defended it was as soon as somebody wanted to have a go at it, I had a go at their practice, right? And their practice was much less sustainable than what we were doing. Now, I hasten to add, I wasn't the person that introduced no grading in my school. It was there when I started, but I was the defenders. Of course, when I went away on sabbatical, the academic board passed a resolution which stopped this practice. So one of the things that I think we have to think about now is not just good ideas, because they're always around, but they didn't stick. So one of the things I think we're in the business of doing now is the stickability of good ideas and the pervasiveness of good ideas and the uptake of good ideas on a wider and wider front. So in terms of the challenge going forward, I think that's our big challenge. There will be good ideas, but how do we engage people in such a way that they say, yeah, I can do that. I want to do that. I want to transform what I'm doing. So I think that's one of the things for going forward. Anyway, that's my comment on the response to the questions. Just to wrap up, two things. One, I'm going to say something about what's coming up next, and to apologise for people online that anticipated that we would formally draw this to a close at the end of an hour. We're going to draw it a little longer than now, only a few more minutes. So what's coming up next? Two things coming up next. The first thing on the 23rd of October is the next event in the series that we're running on new directions in AI research and practice, the webinar series. This is entirely online. There's no face-to-face component. And we are having a panel of people. Phil will be on that panel, Kath Ellis from Western Sydney, Danny Liu, who was mentioned earlier in terms of his 2 lanes idea. Maybe he's got something else to say other than 2 lanes. Kane Murdoch from Macquarie, and Thomas Corbin, who you've been hearing about. Where'd he go? There he is, in the middle there. You've been hearing about earlier. He's on the panel too. Secure assessment tasks in a time of Gen AI. That's the thing. That's the next event. The next normal CRADLE seminar will be on the 11th of November with Margaret. And Margaret will be focusing on more than the individual, transforming feedback cultures. Margaret's done a lot of work which has identified the massive, massive variation in feedback cultures in different places, some of which are quite toxic. So it'd be quite interesting to see what's come out of that work and what can we learn from this massive cultural difference, and can we deal with that? Now, that is going to be in our normal form, which will be hybrid. So there will be a face-to-face element, just like today, and an online element. And the very last thing I want to do is to introduce our new Senior Pro-Vice-Chancellor, Shana Spittle, who will just close off, and she's between us and the cake.
Thanks, David, and I will be brief, knowing that I am standing between you and the cake. So absolute pleasure to be here today at this celebration, and do want to acknowledge that it is a celebration, and it's an amazing opportunity to acknowledge the work that CRADLE has produced over the last decade. David, you mentioned that you've stood the test of time, essentially. There are many who have come and gone, but CRADLE is still standing. And I think it's a really important opportunity to acknowledge the leadership of CRADLE with yourself and Phil, and also the amazing team that work with you. So a huge congratulations on that front. CRADLE has really shaped and challenged higher education when we think about assessment, feedback, and digital learning. Today's discussions remind us of the values that you have and your ethical principles when you're doing research, and also the importance of translating that research and how essential that is for continued teaching and learning practice. Again, a huge congratulations. A huge amount of work has been done. A huge amount has been achieved. Your lovely diagram before of the world shows the huge amount of collaborations you've had, the wide reach you've had. And again, those statistics on the number of attendees that you've had really demonstrate the impact that you are having. So to CRADLE, the entire team, congratulations and well done. Happy 10th, almost maybe somewhat birthday, however you'd like to call that. And I have the pleasure of asking you to join CRADLE for birthday cake and coffee. So thank you very much.